Welcome to Move the Chains with Jonathan Rivers. Here's your host, Jonathan Rivers.
Let there be football. Welcome to Move the Chains. I'm your host, Jonathan Bam Rivers. And on the MTC call sheet today, we're going to talk about Primetime 2.0. Shedeur Sanders passing the torch to his son, Shedeur Sanders. There's a lot of rhetoric going on about what Shedeur Sanders isn't and why he is who he is. And I'm going to give you my perspective on why this quarterback, I think, will be a generational talent and a transformational quarterback when he's drafted into the NFL next month. All right, the second down, I'm answering your social media questions regarding the NFL. As always, I want to make sure that we can dive deep into what's going on in free agency and just questions regarding the landscape of the great game. And in my nonsense narrative, there's a head coach that a fan base that's not used to losing, some want to get rid of because they want to lose to get better. I know it sounds stupid, but sometimes that's the mindset of fans in the NFL, and I'm going to tell you why I think it's very nonsensical, especially considering this is the first ballot Hall of Fame coach. And last but not least, there's a division that I think will have a quarterback reign for the next decade, and it's comprised of quarterbacks whom 30 years ago nobody thought could get the job done for one reason. All that and more here on Move the Chains, but you know how we do it. Let's kick it off with first down. All right, it's the NFL draft season that we're in, right? So you can't necessarily believe everything that you hear people say, but I want to come up with a term, or I want to share a term rather with you, and it's daddy ball. And if you never heard the term daddy ball, it refers to a player that's coached by his or her father, and in this case, of course, I'm talking about Shedeur Sanders and Shedeur Sanders. And a lot of people like to say that it's daddy ball. I mean, he's never been coached by anybody but his dad. And typically people refer to daddy ball in a negative connotation because they say, well, this player is where he is because of his father. And the only reason that I want to bring this up is because I want to say that you're right, but for the wrong reasons. A lot of times players are what they are because their fathers are coaches. And because their fathers are coaches and can do it well, extremely well, and at an extremely high level, that player benefits from that. Now, do you want to know about the benefits on the field? Let me show you this stat line when it comes to Shedeur Sanders. I've got this graphic from when he was at Jackson State and Colorado. So look at him at Jackson State. 79 total career touchdowns and 68% completion percentage, 616 completions, and won 23 of 26 total games. This is at Jackson State and HBCU, right? So this is where Shedeur Sanders started his college career. And then everybody knows he transferred to Colorado with his father to take over a program that had won one game before they got there. So if we bring up that graphic when it comes to Colorado for Shedeur Sanders, the numbers stayed pretty much the same. Now, the win and loss record was because in their first season they won 4 games, and then they turned it around and doubled that the next season as he prepares for the NFL draft. But this is what I want to say about Shedeur Sanders, guys. Like, I don't have a problem with people if they question Shedeur Sanders' arm talent, if they question his physical abilities, because it's okay to question those things because he's a quarterback. He's a football player. So if you have those questions, I'm all for it. I may not have those same questions because me watching Shedeur Sanders play football shows me that, one, he's one of the smartest football players that I've ever seen, not just at the quarterback position. 2, he can make any NFL throw. He has a great pocket awareness. He has great pocket presence, and he has great accuracy. His footwork is phenomenal as well. Now, he's not the fastest guy, but neither is Patrick Mahomes. And we know what great of a quarterback Patrick Mahomes is. But this is kind of where I want to talk about Shedeur Sanders in primetime. You know, and I had this conversation with my director a couple of weeks ago. He said that if Shedeur Sanders' last name wasn't Sanders, he wouldn't be talked about the way he's talked about. And I 100% agree. But again, I agree for a different reason. Because if his name were Shedeur Smith, he would still probably have all of these opportunities that he's created for himself through his play, but yet people wouldn't criticize him as much. I think he gets more criticism because of his name being Sanders than he does praise. So see, that's flipped a lot of the times. And I ask you these questions. We act as if this is unprecedented. We act as if this is the first potential quarterback or player coming into the NFL that didn't have a father that played NFL football prior to him coming. Do we not know that Archie Manning helped birth Eli and Peyton Manning? Yeah, we do. Do we not know that Ed McCaffrey, former Super Bowl winning receiver in the NFL, is the father of Christian McCaffrey? Have we forgotten that Joey Porter, former All-Pro linebacker with the Pittsburgh Steelers, one of the greatest linebackers in the history of that franchise, now has a son, Joey Porter Jr., who is playing for that same franchise and starting at corner, who I think will be one of the best, not just in the AFC, but in the NFL over the next 5 to 10 years? Could go on and on and on. Cameron Hayward's father also played, Iron Hayward played fullback for the Saints. So it's not as if we've never seen lineage take place in the NFL, but for some reason, Shedeur's different to some people. Some people think he's arrogant. And I made this comparison when I was talking to this regarding my director. I said, hey, Shedeur Sanders' confidence, because I think he's confident, reminds me of Joe Burrow's confidence. Joe Burrow walks around with furs. Joe Namath used to walk around with furs. Joe Burrow said, I'm as cool as ice. He said, the championship window while I'm in Cincinnati is my whole career. Is that arrogant? Or does that not exude confidence, which is what you want from your quarterback? And that's what Shedeur Sanders is. And I'll put it this way. The fact that he's only been coached by Deion Sanders, I think is one of the greatest benefits ever. Whom among us would not like to be coached by one of the greatest football players collegiately and professionally ever, who also played baseball professionally at a high level at the exact same time, whom not only understands how to create a brand, but also how to create a culture? Whom wouldn't want to be raised by that? And if you're a quarterback, do you know what you need to understand better than anything, in my estimation? The defense and how secondaries work, because that's what you have to play against every single day at practice and every time you step on the field for a game. And whom better to learn from than the best corner that's ever played in Deion Sanders? You don't think Deion Sanders understands coverages? You don't think Deion Sanders understands quarterback play? You don't think he understands how receivers play? All that is compiled into whom Shedeur Sanders is. So I think what happens is a lot of people see the flash of prime time, and they see the flash of prime time 2.0 in Shedeur Sanders, and they forget to focus on the substance. They're both a part of who Shedeur Sanders is. They're both a part of who he's going to be for his entire career. And I just simply think that daddy ball in this case is a phenomenal thing for Shedeur Sanders, because he was raised by one of the greats and he's been coached by one of the greats. And I think you'll see that as he takes his time to the NFL. All right, when we come back from the break, it'll be your questions via social media. Back when we move the chains, right after this. And welcome back to Move the Chains. And before I get to second down to your social media questions, as always, I want to take this very opportunity to thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for hosting Move the Chains. Secondly, I want to thank you, the fans. The fanfare has been amazing, man. I'm talking about from TikTok to YouTube to seeing people in the streets, even coming into the studio every day. I really appreciate the feedback and the support that Move the Chains is getting. We're growing into bigger and better things, and I want to continue to remind you that changes are coming for the better. My team and myself are working tirelessly and hard at making this product one of the best that you've ever seen, and you'll see the fruits of that labor very soon, trust me. And last but not least, man, I got to give shout out to the best production crew in the business, whether it's Ernest, whether it's Josiah, whether it's JJ, whether it's Alex. Everything's handled from the show prep to the video to the lower thirds to TikTok to Facebook to social media to YouTube. Got a group of people doing great things, and I want to give a shout out to them, because without them, none of this can get done. All right, having said all that, you know what time it is. It's time for second down. All right, social media questions, I always love them. I always scour the internet to try to find what people are talking about and the questions that they have. So let's get into it, man. First question, is Aaron Rodgers still a starter in the NFL? The answer is yes. But the answer is yes because of the needs of certain teams. Because if you didn't have a team like the New York Giants, if you didn't have a team like, the Cleveland Browns at this point in time, in this juncture, if you didn't have a team like the Vegas Raiders where they are void of a quarterback, then the answer possibly would be no. And I'm not saying that because Aaron Rodgers is void of talent. Aaron Rodgers can still sling it. Aaron Rodgers can still throw a dime off his back foot. He can still move in the pocket a little bit. But I just think there's something about Aaron Rodgers. And if you go back to his last year in Green Bay, where they didn't make the playoffs, and then when he got to the Jets, not only did he get hurt in the first 4 snaps of his first season with the Jets' record was worse with Aaron Rodgers than it was under Zach Wilson in Aaron Rodgers' second year. I need you to marinate on that, man. His record as a starting quarterback of the Jets was a worse record than when they had Zach Wilson. So maybe it's the Jets. And you know how I've berated the Jets for the quarterbacks that they've thrown into the abyss over the past decade and a half. But Aaron Rodgers, I think, has had a lot to do with that. So it's not physical that he's not able to get the job done anymore, and I really can't put my finger on it, but the question is yes. And it's not necessarily because of Aaron Rodgers, it's because of teams who are in dire need of a quarterback who are willing to still try to sign a 41, 42-year-old quarterback coming off of multiple injuries because people think that they can recreate the situation that happened with Tom Brady, and I'm here to remind everybody that was the exception and not the rule. All right, what do we have for my second question? Can the Cincinnati Bengals win from building from the outside in? They can, but I don't recommend it. And let me explain what I mean. So building from the outside in, I simply mean that they're signing their wide receivers, right? And they're trying to make sure that they make Joe Burrow happy. But I think the best thing to make Joe Burrow happy is to protect Joe Burrow and have a better defense. So I'll continue to say the Cincinnati Bengals, I cannot hear excuses from people next year when the Bengals have the 31st ranked defense. Because when the Vikings had the 32nd ranked defense a few years ago when Kirk Cousins led them to the playoffs, all I heard was, well, Kirk Cousins and the Vikings get lucky. Even though they're putting up all these points offensively, they get lucky. Nobody talked about how bad their defense was because that's how their team was constructed. I need you to give the Cincinnati Bengals that same type of criticism. Be fair across the board. And this is what they wanted. They've allowed their best defensive player, Trey Henderson, to seek a trade. Now, I know they've offered him some money, but if you have somebody who's led the league in sacks the past 2 seasons, he's one of the best defensive players in the league. And I think he should be paid as such. So do the Bengals. But they just feel like it should be by somebody else because they wanted to make sure they brought Jamar Chase and T. Higgins back into the fold. And I want to remind you this. When was the last time Joe Burrow was void of talent on the offensive side of the football? Let's go back to LSU. He had a squad. And Joe Burrow's had a squad other than his rookie season where he got hurt. Since then, when he was able to go get Chase, and they have Higgins and they had Tyler Boyd, and now they've got Ilyasova along with these 2 guys, they're not void of talent offensively. So I don't want to hear any excuses when the Cincinnati Bengals possibly miss the playoffs for the 3rd straight year because they're built from the outside in and offense only. All right, what's the last question I have today? What team has performed well in free agency? Now, I said well because I didn't want to necessarily say the best because you don't know that until time comes. And I think the Patriots have done great in free agency. I think the Bears have done great in free agency. But I think the Philadelphia Eagles have been spot on in free agency. And it's not because of whom they've acquired. It's because of those whom have departed the Philadelphia Eagles. And you may be asking me, well, why would you say they've done well in free agency when people have left? Well, because guys like Oren Burks and Milton Williams and James Bradbury and Kenneth Gainwell and Darius Slay, these guys were pivotal players in the Super Bowl run for the Philadelphia Eagles, yet they were able to let them go because they need the salary cap space. And you know why they're able to let them go? Because they did such a great job in the draft. So do I not think that they're going to continue to build through the draft with Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman, whom I call, like I said, the Theo Epstein of the NFL? Like Howie Roseman is doing things that Ozzie Newsome did for the Baltimore Ravens. The reason the Ravens have been so good for so long is because they've always been great in the draft, and that's what the Eagles are. So contrary to popular belief, free agency can be done at a high level by getting rid of certain players as well because you know whom you drafted, whom you developed, and the salary cap space that you're now creating. All right, when we come back from the break, Steel City doesn't feel like they want their coach anymore. I'm going to tell you why that's a bad place here on this mic. No pun intended. Back with my nonsense narrative on Move the Chains right after this. Hey, welcome back into the show, man. I'm not going to delay this any longer because it's time for my favorite segment of the show, which means it's time for the nonsense narrative. All right, Mike Tomlin is a great coach, point blank, period. If you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, which my mother is, but she's not in the category like some other fans that I've heard. They want to get rid of Mike Tomlin because they think he's overrated. I've heard people say that Mike Tomlin is overrated because he's underachieved. So let me just get this graphic to talk about underachieving. 183 wins, 1 Super Bowl win, 2 Super Bowl appearances, 7 AFC North titles, and a playoff record of 8-11. Now, that playoff record is below 500. No doubt. Not going to dispute that. The same way I'm not going to dispute that Mike Tomlin can get some criticism. See, I think a lot of times, I'm going to talk from both sides here. I think a lot of times people are so afraid to criticize Mike Tomlin because he's such a great coach. He has not just great one-liners, but he's a culture creator, and he believes what he says and says what he believes, and everybody loves it. I love Mike Tomlin. He's one of the greatest coaches, I think, in my lifetime, and he's one of the best coaches that I've ever seen. He will be a Hall of Famer when he finishes. But I think criticism is okay for Mike Tomlin because he can deserve some. When you have a team that has not won a playoff game in the last 7 or 8 years, it is okay to criticize the head coach. I'm fine with that. But what is not okay to do is to sit back in retrospect and not appreciate how this coach has gotten this team to the playoffs with the lackluster quarterback play that they've had. And I know that's the narrative that everybody understands, but this is what I want you to understand is the biggest irony or catch-22 for the Steelers. I think the problem wasn't, and I've said this before, so I want to retract my statement. The problem with the Steelers and Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan, who's the GM, isn't that they held on to Ben Roethlisberger too long. I used to always say they held on to him too long. I think they could have gotten rid of him a year early, but it wouldn't have mattered if they didn't bring in his replacement, and that was the issue. The issue wasn't keeping Roethlisberger. The issue was keeping him without a succession plan. See, that's what the Packers never have an issue doing. They never have an issue with a succession plan, and Pittsburgh has. And I don't know if you know this, but Najee Harris, the former running back who's now a Charger, said that when he was there, when he got drafted in 2021, there was no leadership there, no veteran leadership on the offensive side of the football. And I didn't take it as a shot. I didn't think Mike Tomlin had a problem with culture. I think Najee Harris was telling the truth because in his rookie season, Ben Roethlisberger was 39 years old, and that was his last year. The very next season when Kenny Pickett took over, the oldest man on that on that offense was 26 years old. So there was no maturity there. There were no veterans that could help bring in a guy like Najee Harris. So I get it. So when they lost Ben Roethlisberger, they didn't just lose a quarterback, they lost veteran leadership on the offensive side of the football as well. So somebody asked me, is Mike Tomlin averse to offense? I say no. He's averse to the offense not being terrible. That's what he's averse to because he understands that he has to have a game manager because he's only had game manager ceiling when people use that term. I love a game manager because they do what they're supposed to do, but the best game managers can also win games, and the Steelers quarterbacks haven't been able to do that. So the fact that he's been in the playoffs and this team almost every single year has never had a losing record speaks to the way that he can coach. He can deserve some criticism, but getting rid of him would be a huge mistake in my estimation. All right, when we come back from the break, it'll be the final drive. You don't want to miss it. Back with the last half of Move the Chains right after this. Welcome back to the final segment of the show, so you know what that means. It's time for the final drive. Mark my words, man, the NFC East will have a quarterback reign for the next decade. Jane Daniels, Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts, don't even know who the quarterback's going to be for the New York Giants, doesn't matter. Those three, I want you to think back 30, 50 years ago when people thought black quarterbacks couldn't play in the NFL because they weren't good leaders or they weren't smart enough. You've got national champions, you've got Super Bowl winners, you've got great leaders, and you've got Heisman Trophy winners all in that same division. This division is going to be one of the best divisions because they have three of the best leaders and quarterbacks in the NFL. All right, don't forget, you can not only catch Move the Chains right here on the Sports Leader WXTX Fox 54, but you can also catch us on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. It's at Move_the_Chains. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. We're here for it. As always, another banger. Hey, for the best production crew in the business, for the best YouTube crew in the business, I'm your boy, Jonathan Bam Rivers, and always remember, build every day, brick by brick. And until next time here on Move the Chains, God bless.